I want to speak a little bit about troubling development. It's not something new, far from it, but it's rearing its ugly head once again in Europe, and I just want to speak a little bit about it. That is anti-Semitism. Now, people point out that Semites don't just include Jewish people, they include a lot of different groups across the Middle East, including, ironically, Palestinians. But in today's jargon, when we talk about anti-Semitism, it basically translates as anti-Judaism. So, for the purpose of simplicity, let's think of it in that way. So, I'm speaking in the context of two things. Partly that there's been a series of attacks on synagogues in Paris in recent weeks, recent days I should say, in relation to the Israel-Gaza conflict. And these mobs of ostensibly pro-Palestinian people, I don't know who exactly they are. I don't know whether they are young Muslims or far-right people, or I don't know exactly, but they have been targeting synagogues in Paris, therefore targeting Jewish people in Paris. Now, France has a very long history of anti-Jewish bigotry, a long and shameful history of anti-Jewish bigotry, I might add, and it's not the only such country in Europe to have this. It has existed in Britain, but to a lesser extent, and in other parts of Europe. I needn't remind everyone about the Shoah in World War II, better known as the Holocaust, but Shoah is a Hebrew name for that awful event. And by the way, I just don't buy into conspiracy theories that it never happened, pumped out by the far right. I just don't buy it. I regard the Shoah as a historical event, so that's the way it is. That's my position. The persecution of Jewish people is absolutely indisputable throughout history. Now, people will point out Muslims and Christians and other groups have been persecuted too, and that's true, but there's probably no group that has been so persistently persecuted as the Jewish people. And given that there's only about 10 million Jews in the world, a bit more than that, maybe at the very most 20-30 million in a world of 7 billion, then they are a minority that have really come under a lot of heavy persecution. By contrast, Muslims and Christians make up over 1 billion people each, so it just doesn't weigh up. I mean, I don't want to ignore the persecution that happens against those groups as well. There's examples of minorities being persecuted in societies all around. I mean, there's Muslim minorities persecuted in Burma. Christians are widely persecuted across the Middle East, and we now have a shameful situation of the largest mass exodus of Christians in the Middle East since World War I. That's something that needs to be a lot more covered, and I'll probably make another video specifically about that. But this video is specifically about anti-Semitism. Now, in the context of the conflict in the Holy Land, there's a very dangerous trend for people to equate Jews with Israelis. So in other words, people outraged at what they perceive to be the immoral actions of Israel, they then use that as a cover for their vicious anti-Jewish hatred. There's a few points I would like to make. Number one, the Jews is a very ignorant terminology anyway, in the sense that this notion that all Jewish people are one and the same is deeply flawed. If you take someone like Noam Chomsky, he could not be more different than someone like, I believe his name was Baruch Goldstein, the extremist who assassinated Prime Minister Rabin in 1995. Apologies if I've got that name wrong. I believe it was one Baruch Goldstein. And I'll put an annotation if I've got that wrong. But you know, you get left-wing Jews, right-wing Jews, centrist Jews, feminist Jews, conservative Jews, liberal Jews, Orthodox Jews, so Zionist Jews. So this notion that Jews are one and the same is a very dangerous idea, and I see it time and time again, especially from two particular groups. far-right white supremacists and Islamists, basically. You also see it as very common in countries like Turkey and other parts of the Middle East, in Russia. There's pockets of it in the United States, but it's in France. It's a very widespread problem, and it's very ugly and very sad that this mentality still exists in the 21st century. It stems from anti-Jewish conspiracy theories that the Jews are out to take over the world, that they control the banking systems, that world governments are controlled by Jews. And if you look at the sort of rhetoric that some people use, it's unsettling that these people are so brainwashed by their hatred that they actually believe this is the case. You know, just because there is successful Jewish business people, there happens to be Jewish bankers, Jewish entrepreneurs, does not mean the world is run by Jews. If that was the case, then every world leader would be a Jew, and clearly they aren't. So it's a completely flawed ideology. Now, to the best of my knowledge, Barack Obama is not a Jew. Angela Merkel is not a Jew. Francois Hollande is not a Jew. Vladimir Putin certainly isn't a Jew. People say they control monetary systems, economic systems. Well, it is true that there's quite a large number of Jewish people within the financial sector. I won't dispute that. But likewise, you could find traits that are common in other ethnic or religious groups. That's a bit like saying, so if you're going to take that line of thinking, then you're going to have to say, oh well, the Chinese are taking over the world because they have Chinatowns all over the world. So that's, you could argue that's cultural imperialism, which of course is a flawed argument. But you know, if you want to go down that line, then you could almost argue any group is taking over the world in some way or another. But even if banking systems were dominated by people who happen to be all either Jewish or of Jewish descent, it still wouldn't justify hatred against all Jews. And the actions of some Jews don't justify the hatred of all Jews. So I've always defended, although I've made my position in the Holy Land conflict clear, I've always defended people's right to criticise Israel. And I don't agree with the idea that in some pockets of the US it's difficult for politicians to do that. I think that's wrong. I think Israel, like any country, should face scrutiny. But I've also made my position on the Holy Land conflict clear. I believe that Israel is taking a necessary approach of self-defense, and Hamas has brought this situation on. But that's beside the point. I've already made my stance on that clear, so it's beside the point. It just pisses me off that there are people out there who use this conflict as an excuse for the fact that they basically just hate Jews. And they hate all Jews, including Jews who have vocally opposed Israel's actions. There's many Jewish academics who are staunchly anti-Israel. And also there's Jews who are anti-Zionism. So this spiteful anti-Jewish hatred is, and the reason I'm focusing on that, people might say, oh, why not focus on bigotry against Muslims or Christians or other groups? It's because there isn't the same level of conspiracy theories with the other groups. There isn't the same level of justification when it comes to prejudice against the other groups. And there's far fewer Jews in the world than there are Christians or Muslims, so they do face a unique threat in that sense when anti-Jewish violence comes about. I mean, what happened in Paris was an utter disgrace. And there's already people making excuses for that. So I'll leave it there. But and by the way, this has nothing to do with criticism of the religion of Judaism. I believe all religions should be subject to criticism. So if people have a specific criticism of a particular Jewish doctrine, fine. I have no problem with that. But what I'm talking about is these sort of conspiracy theories that lead to hatred of an entire people. That would be just like saying all Muslims are jihadists, which of course they aren't. Or saying all Christians are white supremacists, which of course they aren't. In fact, most Christians probably aren't even white. But the point here is, it's just a very ugly thing that is based on nonsense. Most of these conspiracy theories really fall flat. If you look at them, if you look at the sort of videos, the sort of things they're coming out with are, I mean, if you look at the videos, they're clearly edited. You know, they'll have these statements that Jews have made, and you'll see like half of the videos missing and things like that. Of course there's Jewish extremists out there. And of course there's some powerful Jews out there, just like there's some powerful Christians, and there's some powerful Muslims. King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia is one of the most powerful men in the world, but no one says, oh, it's a Muslim conspiracy. The most powerful man in the world, the two most powerful men in the world, Obama and Putin, would both call themselves Christians. Obama, I believe, is evangelical Baptist denomination. Don't know the exact name. Putin is Russian Orthodox Christian, and he often hides behind the church. So, you know, if you're going to come out with conspiracy theories about Jews, then be consistent. So I just think this is very unfortunate. And just for the record, I'm not Jewish. In case anyone's wondering, I'm not Jewish. I happen to have come from a Christian background, but personally, I'm not practicing anymore. I'm somewhat agnostic. So, just in conclusion, by all means, voice dissent against Israel. If you hate what Israel's doing, that's your right. If you have disagreements with Jewish doctrine, fine. But the spiteful anti-Jewish hatred is something that is absolutely intolerable. Just as intolerable as hate crime against Muslims or Christians or any other group. It's a disgrace. And if you're an open-minded person, you would recognise that.